So thanks for joining this afternoon. We do this once, we're doing this every couple of weeks at the moment, but probably after the summer holidays, we'll go back to doing our Women in Synthetic Biology monthly conversations with women in synthetic biology or women in biotechnology. And I'll just wait for Eve to join us. Afternoon, Eve. Thanks for joining.
Hi.
Welcome. And just to let you know, we are recording this, so as long as you're happy with that. So anyway, let's kick off, and we're really delighted that this afternoon we have got Irina Babina, who is the CEO of Concr. Is that how you pronounce your company?
It is exactly. That's right.
Fantastic, got that right. And so we're really going to have a conversation with Irina about her journey, about the job that she does today, how she got there, and some top tips for people that are, well, maybe like taking Irina's journey, moving from academia into industry. What we'll do is have a conversation with Irina. If you've got questions for her, could you put, well, actually, we probably can do hands up because there's just a few of us. So you show your hand up if you've got a question, rather than put them in the Q&A box. So we'll just keep it really informal. But Irina, I'd like to start, if you could maybe give us a bit of an idea about your techbio company. I think it's, strictly speaking, a techbio company. So really interested to hear about what you do, what you're trying to do, and where you're at with that.
Sure, thanks, Liz, and hi, everyone. Yes, so techbio is kind of an umbrella term given to companies that work in that intersection between technology and biology. And Concr is a techbio company, or the other word for us is an enabling technology. So we operate in precision medicine space, specifically precision oncology, and we provide predictive modeling tools, essentially, to predict therapeutic response to cancer treatments for individual patients. And that's whether these standard of care existing therapeutics or whether they are still emerging and are in clinical trials. So essentially what we do is model human biology, hence the link to synthetic biology. And one of our services that we provide is synthetic control arms for clinical trials. And we work with pharma for that predominantly, but also recently started a trial to assess whether our technology would work in standard clinical practice and working in early triple negative breast cancer. So we've got a trial just launched in January this year, and we've got our first patients recruited at the Royal Marsden Hospital. So that's that in a nutshell.
That sounds quite amazing. So you're saying, can I go back to the bit you said, like a synthetic arm in a clinical trial? Could you explain what that is?
Sure. It's really... So a lot of clinical trials, especially now for targeted therapeutics, fail to recruit sufficient number of patients. And also there is, it's becoming quite expensive. And a lot of trials fail because they don't reach that point of efficacy, as in the new emerging therapeutic is not actually better than standard of care. But for a lot of these patients, they only end up in clinical trials when they've already exhausted all available treatments to them. So it's what you would say is it's an end line. So there are no other options, and they would get recruited into a clinical trial. So for those patients, it would typically be the therapeutic being tested, an emerging therapeutic, plus the standard of care, and in a single arm study, as in there is only one arm and they just get that combination treatment. But in those cases, it's really difficult to tell whether or not the patient is responding to the standard of care given to them that they haven't had before, or whether the effect that you're seeing is actually due to the novel therapeutic. So to be able to separate the effect to standard of care and thereby isolate the response to just the novel therapeutic, that's what we do. We create digital twins of individual patients using the technology behind Concr that actually stemmed from astrophysics. And then we would use the molecular information collected as part of routine practice for that patient and predict what is the probability of response of this particular patient to standard of care, thereby creating their own control then. So all the patients who would be recruited into a clinical trial in a single arm, we essentially make a randomized study by creating that artificial or synthetic control arm. So for rare cancers, for example, or for cancers that are particularly lethal, they can only really run single arm studies. So they're really limiting because it's really difficult to assess what's the efficacy of these particular drugs.
Sounds amazing and incredibly powerful tool. I mean, I've heard about digital twinning in manufacturing, for instance, but not within kind of clinical trial setting. So are you unique in offering that? Are you the only company that's developing these kind of digital twins for clinical trials?
Yeah, there are a few, and most digital twin studies, digital twin technologies that I've come across would create digital twins by matching certain criteria like age, sex, prior history, maybe some histopathology from a really large data set. And hence you need that big data, real world data, and the power of real world data. So there would be companies that would sit on a really large collection of that information, and they would pick, okay, well, we need these patients of that age, and then they have these inclusion criteria that are actually quite broad. So they would find these patients from a large data set, and that would be a kind of a digital twin. What we do that's different is you can't match patients at a molecular level directly because we're all different at a molecular level. But what we do is we match units of biology. So the bit I mentioned from astrophysics that the technology allows is we model interactions. So how does a drug interact with a cell? How do cells interact in the tissue? How do tissues interact in the body? And that's really unique. So we then have real world data from patients, over 10,000 patients, and seeing how different patients responded to certain therapies. And then when the patient comes in, they will have a molecular information collected as part of a clinical trial, then would be able to match units of biology that the model has seen before and match it as close as possible to the patient, not just at a clinical level, but also at a molecular level.
Yeah. That's incredible, really, that you can do that. And
I wish I could claim credit. I didn't come up with this. I'm not the founder.
Yes, I was going to say, where did it come from, and kind of what stage is your company at in terms of, funding and partnerships, getting your technology out into the real world, as it were?
Sure. Well, let's start maybe at the beginning. The company was founded by a biomedical engineer, an astrophysicist or computational physicist, and a medical oncologist from the NHS. And the idea was that multidisciplinarity, if you like, is really the uniqueness of of the company, because we'll look at the problem in a really holistic way. And the medical oncologist naturally would say that, well, there isn't really a tool in the clinic currently that will tell me whether or not the patient is going to respond ahead of time. So that's a real problem. And even if there is a patient that probably would benefit from a therapy that's not standard or doesn't come as the first line, there is no way of telling that. So you have to give the treatment, wait 6 months, see if they respond. If they don't, then there is a second line, etc. So there isn't a way to model whether or not the patient will respond, which is bonkers if you think about it, because we will do a computational simulation of a house before we build a house, or a flight before when you learn how to fly, and yet we give these really toxic drugs with no notion whatsoever whether or not they're going to respond. So that was the desire, to essentially create a technology that would be able to do that.
Yeah.
And the company was founded in 2018. The first tranche of funding was 2021, and we are kind of pre-Series A now. So we're raising Series A early next year. And in terms of market access, we are revenue generating company now. We are predominantly serving pharma and the pharmaceutical supply chain. But as I mentioned, we started our clinical trial at the Morriston. So with the view that eventually the technology will find its way to a healthcare system.
Yeah.
That's
amazing.
Some years away.
Yeah, you've come an awfully long way in just 6 years, though. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
There was a really strong focus on validation. So there are a lot of companies, techbio companies, and there's a lot of hype around AI. So what we really focused on is generating really sound evidence of the fact that the technology works and what's the applicability. And this is one of the things that when I look back that we wish we did more of, is bring on more advisors to bring those different perspectives as to how can we serve the community better. So the value propositions and the products we currently have been shaped by the customers themselves. So it's not like it was a case of technology push. We sort of asked, well, where is the need? How can we shape it in the way that would excite you, that would make you pay for it? So we had it from upfront. So that's why I think we've got the initial pull.
Yeah, fantastic, amazing progress. So I guess the next question is, how did you get to be where you are today? What's your journey to to being CEO of what sounds like a really fast-growing, exciting, yes, data-intense company?
Yes, well, my background not at all in data, and I actually have a slide that summarizes my journey, which is to give you an idea of how it was not planned. And I certainly never set out to become a CEO. In fact, I wanted to never ever be a CEO or a founder or run a company at all. But this is a journey as a snapshot, and where I started, as everybody who ever goes into science, just naturally curious. I started dentistry, hated it, dropped out, went to do genetics, because the first human genome was just published and it was super fascinating. So I started there, and then while I was still doing my degree, I did 2 kind of 6 to 9 months placements, sort of internships. One was in a startup, actually in a cancer tech startup, and another one was in a large pharmaceutical company. So really process-driven, massive organization. So at the end of it, I thought, well, not really taken by anything. I'll do a PhD because I'm still interested in cancer. Cancer is crazy. Your own body's trying to kill you. So I went and really dug deep into the biology of cancer. So that was a great PhD. That was in the College of Surgeons in Ireland. And so my degree was in genetics. Then my PhD was more proteomic, sort of cellular level. And then I wanted to see, how does that actually translate into medicine? How do patients eventually get the result of that research? So I did do a postdoc, 2 postdocs at the Institute of Cancer Research in London. And part of it was with the Royal Marsden Hospital and AstraZeneca. So I got to see kind of how drugs come about and how do they then get translated into clinic. And then during that time, for me, I was just getting a bit restless, and I really wanted to see the results of my work, and I couldn't really wait 20, 30 years before my idea gets translated. So I started looking out again, and I really liked working in a startup because you can see the results or the impact of your work pretty much immediately. So I took on again a job as a clinical contractor, essentially developing a product for a clinical trial recruitment kind of software. So I did that for a bit. I did like it. And what I did also know that I really like research as well. And what really drives research, probably a bit ashamed to admit, I realized it too late, is not necessarily good science. It's the availability of funding behind it. So I thought, well, actually, if you really want to make a difference, what you need to do is control the money. So I went into funding management, and it was NIHR funding at the time. So devolved 120 million into research programs, and I think it was Imperial NHS Trust funding that we devolved into Imperial College to fund different research programs. And that was great because I got to see a lot of other founders, a lot of other scientists trying to do really excellent science. And I was supporting them in any way I could, other than just the money. So that was really good. I realized I really like that element of kind of developing science or helping founders develop science. So I went to do an MBA because I just wanted to see, well, how else can we do it? And so that's what I did, and then went into venture capital thereafter. Still held several positions, as you can tell here, and I really like that. So I kind of at that point knew that I kind of need to be in that startup ecosystem or innovation ecosystem. And I did a bit of consulting, a bit of investing, a bit of NHS innovation, commercial work. And interestingly, was approached by a PhD student from my postdoc days who set up a company and said, actually, can you kind of have a look? We might be onto something here. Can you help us kind of review some documents, etc.? So I advised for them, and then I really liked what they were doing. So that was obviously Concr. And I joined them then as head of strategy, and then chief business officer, and eventually CEO in January. So the reason I'm kind of showing this is because, first of all, I was doing a lot of things in parallel. So not everybody's cup of tea, but I get bored really easily. So I kind of need to do different things and be involved in different things. And entrepreneurship definitely provides that. So, and then the other bit is around networking, how you never know, like all these people you accumulate through this time just comes to roost eventually.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that. That's quite the career path. And you've only just got started as well. So who knows where you're going?
I know. Scary. I don't think there's a way back, and what's the way forward? I don't know. Presidency, yes.
And I guess if you're thinking about that transition, I mean, obviously, there's a couple of things there that you said. One about, always feeling a need to learn more, but spotting what you need to know, and doing things in parallel, which is challenging. So amazing that you managed to do all those things. Are there any other, any other experiences in making that transition that made it harder or easier, maybe to move from kind of pure research to very much more applied research, and like you say, the role that you have now, which is much more around industry and funding and strategy for a company?
I think the academic years and science years really prepare you for that really well. There are some transferable skills that are excellent that I didn't even realize I had until I looked back and said, actually, I leverage these skills all the time. To me, the three main ones are definitely problem solving. So in research, you're constantly working with unknowns. Like your whole job is to make sense of the unknown and to discover things and kind of adapt to new information constantly and analyze that. So the problem solving is an essential skill in a good researcher. It makes them a really good researcher. As a good manager, makes them a really good manager. So that's definitely a skill I've learned as a scientist. As a CEO, that's ultimate boss stage of problem solving is being a CEO, because you have about 1,000 plates to spin, especially in a startup, and problems, it's mostly problems, and you just have to solve them, and you eventually just become really, really good at it. So that's definitely one. And data analysis linked to that. So being able to, again, deal with data, deal with information. Nowadays, data analysis is everywhere. You just have to be able to work with data. Otherwise, you won't really go far.
So true. Yeah.
And critical thinking, the ability to really ask the right questions at the right time. And I think as a scientist, that's what I probably didn't do enough of. But rather than trying to do everything and be interested by everything, can you actually be able to ask a really critical question? As an investor, for example, it would be, what will make this company fail? Like, where are the weak points of this company? As a CEO, you kind of go, okay, well, there's actually probably too many examples, but I hope that, so these are kind of the three main transferable skills I learned. There are some that really help me back, and probably linked to critical thinking is attention to detail, and how, as a scientist, in order to publish, you have to go into the enormous degree of detail, and taking that to business, you'll run out of time immediately. So you kind of have to find a balance of, this is good enough, I will go with this and I'll improve it later. And I think in the early stages, I was too obsessed with just making everything perfect and making sure that everybody will get it. But actually, in reality, in business, it's the idea. And you kind of start with your prototype and then you build it as time goes on. So don't try to jump straight to the end. And I think as a scientist, you kind of tend to. And working in a team, as a scientist, again, especially as a postdoc, you're really isolated.
Yeah.
You kind of
very true.
Always work on it's all independent thinking, independent working. You develop your own ideas. You almost kind of hide your data from everybody else. whereas you can't work like that in a startup. It's a constant communication game. You have to just constantly play off other people and be able to leverage other people's expertise. And I think that really, again, looking back in multiple roles, especially as I was making that transition, that really helped me back.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess those are the traits. Sorry,
yeah,
Irina.
just being dependent on other people. That
Yeah.
was such a foreign concept, because previously I would go, well, I need to work more, then I'll just work more. But then you have to wait for other people to do their piece, and that was a little bit foreign at the start.
Yeah. I guess another question I have really is that with that transition is around communicating about what you do as well. Did you find, that transition from, you talk about science, like you said, it's very detail oriented and full of caveats. And when you're selling a concept to an investor, maybe you need to talk about the science and what you're doing in a different way. Was that transition easy to make? Did you struggle with that?
Well, that's the one thing I personally didn't struggle with, but I can see how it would be a challenge. And I could see it in others. So when I was program manager at Imperial, I could see how other scientists really struggled with that, because it's their research. But the people, it's not about what you want to tell, it's about what other people want to hear. And you really have to change your mindset about how you present your results. So I personally had a fantastic PhD mentor, and she taught me from really early on that how to present information and how to kind of tailor to your audience. So I think that it's probably an exception, but I think by and large you're right. But it's also a positive thing, especially if you are involved as a scientist in kind of patient groups or lay, what are they called? Public engagement and public involvement.
Yeah.
Because the way you talk to research about your research to lay audiences really changes how you generally talk to people. So it's definitely a skill worth practicing. But the ability to communicate and to kind of extract, even, yes, you do loads of research, but ultimately it boils down to about 5 figures. So even to be able to do that and process loads of information into just the kernels of or hooks of information that other people will be interested in, I think that's ultimately what your pitch is, because it's your idea first and then the evidence behind it. So I think they're really good skills, but you do have to kind of tweak them slightly.
Yeah. No, thank you for that.
One thing is, so I'll say, grant writing never goes away. I used to write grants as a researcher. I used to write grants as a program manager, helping others secure grants, and I still write grants now. And I'm just getting better and better at writing grants. The most recent one was Innovate UK. Like, that's the skill you just never lose. But I think it relates to messaging in that in grants, people want to see certain amount of information. That's why they give you the guidelines. If you follow the guidelines and tell them exactly what they want to see, you'll probably get the grant. So it's a really good skill.
Yeah, I second that. It's people don't answer the exam question. Answer the exam question. Just stick with answering the question. Yeah, absolutely. I guess one question I have, because this is obviously a women in synthetic biology kind of group. Have you had any issues around being a woman in what still is quite a man's world in biotech? It's getting better. It really is improving. But have you had any people doubted you more, or you felt you were treated differently because you were young and female in a tech bio, heavily data driven kind of anarchy world? I shouldn't say that, but you know what I mean.
Interestingly, maybe I just didn't notice it, but I can't say that it was pronounced. I certainly noticed certain investors asking certain questions that they would never have asked a man. And but I call it out. So I think I can't say that I've experienced discrimination necessarily, but I certainly do experience different type of treatment. Yeah. Equally though, in the last fundraise, most of the investors I spoke with were women. So I previously, when I first went into venture capital, there were only men. There were male founders, in the room, in the investment committee, they were all men. I hadn't seen one woman for years. And in the last maybe 2 years, most people I talked to were women,
Yeah.
not just associate level, but like partner level, principal level. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really good. So I can't say I do think it has changed. And I think there are a lot more of us now. Um, but I don't know whether it's because the times have changed, but it's
Mm.
yeah, I can't say that I personally have experienced too much negativity from that side.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good sign, I think, actually. That shows things are changing in the right direction. So that's really encouraging.
When I
I
was
guess,
academic, however, it was a different ballgame. But
yeah,
yeah, let's not talk about that.
no, no, that's changing too, but not quite as quickly, I fear. Um, I guess there might be people on the call who are thinking about changing career. So I wondered, you know, it, what advice would you give, sort of general advice that you give somebody who's maybe not so happy doing what they're doing now, maybe in the lab, struggling to think about what to do next? Any top tips that you'd like to share with people?
Sure. Um, I probably have too many to share because I always took my career really seriously. I never really had well, for a lot of my life, at a personal level, I didn't really have a safety blanket. So I had to kind of build that first. So, and I knew I could only do that through education and through jobs. So I did pay probably a bit too much attention to the steps I was making, especially early on. But what I think looking back, I would do is define what it is that's of value to you. And that can change over time. So for me, around COVID time, well, actually just before COVID, I thought, actually, I don't want to work 5 days. I want to have a job so I can work, 3, 4 days and have enough to be able to do other things. Then after COVID, I realized, well, actually, I do like to work, but I don't want to do just the one job. I want to have several jobs. And like, so it can change over time, but decide what it is that you want to do first, would be my advice. And then do your research. In life sciences, it's just opportunity is incredible, especially for women. There is, it's, there are jobs that are really interesting that never existed back in my day. They are so unique. I mean, look at Sarah. I mean, come on, like you can do just so many different things. And so do your research. I mean, you're already probably going to events like this. That's another thing to do. And just to see what the labor market looks like. So what are
Mhm.
the opportunities in the UK life sciences? It's one of like its biggest pillars for economic growth. So there will be jobs in that space. What kinds of jobs? And they all have, say in the 5 years, they've changed from really standard, boring, kind of really linear jobs to elements of this, elements of that. So you can, look for what jobs are available and then you can go into preparation. So this is this is the job I want, therefore I will tailor it to this job, then do your CV, contact your people, reach out to network, reach out to everybody in your network. It's just so worth doing. And that's why I keep mentioning network because I used to think, oh, it's an immediate thing. I'll just talk to some people at a conference and my problems will be solved. But it's not the case. Like you build it over time, you have to maintain it, you have to keep talking to people and just like meet for a coffee and stuff. So definitely talk to network and then you never know, they might connect you. One of the other things I'd say is don't look for jobs necessarily, or don't apply for jobs necessarily. Identify maybe companies you want to work for, the sort of thing you want to do, and then reach out to senior people in the company through LinkedIn or otherwise and just go, this seems like a really interesting company. I do this. Do you want to meet? Maybe not now, maybe for the future.
Mhm.
So it's definitely worth doing. So
Yeah.
and also actually some of the things I used to think, oh, career progression is not promotion. So you can progress and move completely sideways, as you saw in the diagram. So all of these bits are progression, but I used to think that, oh, I must have the senior in front of my name or principal in front of my name. Absolute garbage. You don't. In fact, it might hold you back.
Yeah. I think that's very, very good advice. I totally agree with yeah. you have to think about your career. Personalized and professional development is what you get out of your job, and it's not just an increase in salary, although sometimes that's necessary and nice to have, but it doesn't always give you job satisfaction either. So, and you need to feel good about yourself and what you do. So, and you clearly do. I think one question that, I was going to ask, and I suspect other people might, is, is it worth doing an MBA? I mean, a lot of people think they ought to have one if they work in business. I suspect it probably depends on where you get trained, but where you get your training as an MBA. But was it useful for you? And would you recommend people think about doing that if they want to move into industry?
Yes, and yes. However, I must admit, straight after finishing the MBA, I thought, I don't think I actually learned that much. A lot of it was kind of common sense, and am I actually going to learn it, use it at all? Because my mindset was still academic. I am learning new material, whereas what MBA taught me is actually the way to think about the problem, not necessarily the material. So what it teaches you is really how to approach a problem, and also it's in the business sense. So there are a lot of things I've learned I didn't realize I knew until I started running a company. And then suddenly all those modules went flooding back, and I went, well, with the benefit of hindsight, yes, I can see why they teach you all these things. So for me, yes, definitely was worth it. For network as well. One of the key things you're buying with the MBA, for me, it wasn't actually the education, it was the network. So we have a WhatsApp group, anything I need, that's my first go-to group. I have this question, somebody will have an answer. And all these people, I did mine at Imperial Business School. So there were a lot of scientifically trained individuals who are business leaders. So it's definitely, as you said, Liz, worth thinking about where you do it. If you want to just go into finance and become an investment director or something like that, it's worth maybe considering something more like LBS that's really kind of commercially driven. If you want to have elements of science, Imperial was really good for introducing the concepts of how do you translate science into a business, or how do you make a successful enterprise out of an idea, things like that. So it's worth it. Network, worth it. I did mine during COVID, so network was a bit of a not so great. So it was all virtual in the last year. But looking back, I definitely use it all the time. I use the network all the time. And some of the modules were great because I can really call bullshit really easily now, especially with the finance teams.
No, that's interesting. It sounds also that it might be useful to do it once one's got into business, where you're then learning things which are very directly relevant to what you're doing on the day-to-day. So maybe it's a timing thing as well. Could be worth considering that.
And it's also actually that you made me think, I did an executive MBA because, as you probably gathered, I like doing different things at the same time. And it is doable. You can do it. But some people would go and just do full-time MBA. And it's 1 year and it's a deep dive and you do things. And if that's your cup of tea, do that. I did mine for the very reason you outlined, because I was doing it and then I was able to apply it, and then you learn kind of on the job. And sometimes it doesn't work, but I enjoyed it again in retrospect.
Yeah, right. And just one, I guess, last question, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. Is you're now a CEO of a company that you didn't found yourself, and have you've obviously taken over from a founder CEO. How has that been? How have you managed that? Because I can imagine that there could be some sensitivities and, territorialism and handing over reins to somebody else. How's that worked?
I would like to think it went really well. All the founders are still with the company, so it wasn't a hostile takeover by any means, and I'm still on very good terms with the former CEO. And I think because I was with the company for a while before succession, it wasn't a sudden thing. So the team knew me, they knew what I was doing, and I was gradually taking more and more bits on. And I think because of that transition being so smooth, I think it went quite well. So sensitivities, I can't say there was anything that was big or anything like that. There were I can't even think of an example where something was a bit amiss, because there was a constant communication. I had questions, there was a handover, because we were talking all the time, it was all really friendly. Ultimately, we were aligned in what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this company a success. It was previously really scientifically minded. It was time to move into more kind of commercial business growth phase, and that's where I came in. But I think overall, the kind of values we shared. So we want to make patients, we want to improve patient outcomes, we want to improve patients' lives with cancer, and we're all want that. So I think because of, which is why I joined in the first place. So I think because of that, it was a pretty smooth transition. At least it felt like that for me. One thing I'm kind of thinking of now is a CEO appoints a C-suite. And that's because they want to cover their blind spots and they need to bring expertise from different angles. But different CEOs have different blind spots. So the one thing I foresee potentially is, because I could do a lot of things, my blind spots differ from the previous CEO. So the way we fill the gaps would be quite different. So I do foresee changes in leadership. And that's something to kind of, I suppose, be aware of. But my experience so far has been smooth.
Brilliant. Sounds super exciting. Thank you anyway for being interrogated. Really appreciate it, and your honesty, being so frank about things. I just wondered if anybody else on the call would like to ask a question. So you can come off camera, put up your hands if you'd like to, or just speak if you'd like to ask Irina a question. Anybody got any thoughts?
I think you asked the one I was going to ask, Liz, the last one, because I work with a lot of scientist-founded companies, and being an academic, in historically myself, I know how possessive you get over your little thing, and I want to support my scientist founders because I know they can run companies and stuff. But I also have to. I suppose my only experience of CEOs coming in and taking over has been the middle-aged white man who thinks he's a dog's bollocks. So it's really nice, I guess, to see the other side, that there are actually women who come in and you're taking over for a reason. It's not just because, I don't know, get the impression with some of the men, it's like, oh, I know better, but you've got a proper vision, and I can imagine it being difficult for some companies, the founders to
And I wonder if that's something you just do again through conversation, but you have to get it out of, like, you have to decide it upfront. There's nothing worse than when you start and then all the problems appear. And I haven't experienced it, but again, I've seen it, where somebody gets recruited based on their expertise without kind of a wider conversation with the team, with the leadership team, or even with the other members of staff. And then it just doesn't gel. So it's something you kind of need to have a frank conversation about. The ability to appoint my C-suite is something I just said I have to do that, because if I can't have a team that I can rely on to deliver the business strategy, it's just not going to work. So it's one of those things you kind of have to agree up front, I think. But again, just constant communication, because if you're aligned in what you're trying to do, you just have to find a way.
Yeah, I think maybe that's where things like the MBA help as well. If it gives you another way of thinking about things, rather this is my business, rather than putting the business interest first, and actually maybe it is better to step away and let somebody else come in. And
yeah, you certainly do a lot of that during the MBA with the coursework and group work. Sometimes you just go, wow, these are the cards I'm dealt. You find a way. You find a way to deliver that project.
Is anybody on the call actively thinking about changing career? If you'd like to share what you're thinking about.
Remembering this is recorded, if you don't want to out yourself as maybe.
Yeah, we can always delete it. But yeah.
I'm always thinking about changing career. Anyone who knows me knows I can't sit still. Fortunately, I have an employer that's quite understanding, and it's like an in-house joke, like, how long are you going to stay this time? Because I get bored so quickly. So I can kind of relate to what you were saying about needing to do different things. But I mean, it's amazing what you've done, but how have you dealt with, like, coped with all that and life at the same time? It seems like such a lot.
There is a term I thought I came up with, but apparently I didn't, called portfolio career. And it's very similar to having an investment portfolio. And the whole point of portfolio, it's not a collection of different things. These are really things that feed into one another. So they're all really supportive. So at some point I had 3 or 4 jobs, but they were all, I didn't feel like I was being trained because I was using the same skills in different settings. So as an investor, you would review your deck in front of you and you kind of go through the same process of what's the problem they're trying to solve, how they communicate, etc., etc. As an entrepreneur, you do exactly the same thing, but in a slightly different way. And as a researcher, you kind of do the same thing. And as a consultant, you do the same thing. So it really depends how you build your portfolio of the things that you do. In my case, it was choosing, well, what's not going to drain me and what's actually of interest. And because there were 2 sides of basically the same thing, or 3 sides of kind of the same thing, I find that wasn't draining. But I had some strict rules about what I do. And like, for example, Sunday's me day. Doesn't matter what happens, Sunday it's me day. And I just do my own stuff. And there were things like that. You just make little rules. And if I break my rules, my husband's immediately like, no, this is a rule, you're breaking the rules. So yeah, that's how. I think you have to, it's a mixture of discipline and interest. Don't try to take too much on because you just want to. If there are things that you like doing, and maybe, I don't know, maybe makes the thing that more passion and the others are more job. Maybe that's one way, but whichever way you build a portfolio, as long as it doesn't drain you, you'll continue doing it.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful.
I think also, Irina, you know, you talk about portfolio careers, but also I think nowadays most people don't have one job for life, and we all need to kind of keep learning new things, and that often means changing careers. So I think you're a really great example of being able to do that. Yeah, and I think it's what we all need to learn how to do. And thankfully, a lot of workplaces are quite flexible and supportive of people doing professional development alongside their role. I know the university that we work with, that I work for, are extremely flexible about giving time and support for people to do training that supports their personal and professional development. And then you have happy staff and they stay. And that's, you know, also what you need, isn't it, in an organization? It's that commitment. So
it's also how I approached creating job descriptions. So when the very first time I had to create a job description, my boss kind of told me, oh, well, we need somebody to do this. And I was like, well, they get bored within like 6 months. And why do we need a PhD trained individual to do this? I mean, this is not going to be stimulating. They have a PhD, you need to have different things that will engage them. So it's okay to have a part of your job that's really dull and boring, as long as you have like projects or something that they can get involved in. So I think even that is already kind of thinking about engaging your brain in different ways. And it's so much better because you activate different parts of your brain for different things, which makes you overall a lot more productive. So now in the company, it's certainly how I think about things. If people want to go and do other things, then by all means.
Yeah, brilliant. If we've not got any more questions, I think Virginia's just had to leave. I just wrap up and say thank you, Irina, for your time and really interesting discussion. It was really fascinating. I'm super impressed with what you've done. I'm really looking forward to seeing, you know, where the company goes and your career goes in the future. But again, thank you so much for sharing so generously with us this afternoon. And yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the summer, everybody. We've got the two Wednesdays time, we've got Rebecca from Expression Edits is going to come and have a chat. So please do join us if you can. And this recording we'll put on YouTube if you missed any bits of it or you want to have another look and listen. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all so much.
Have a good evening. And thank you again, Irina. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.